Hello everyone and welcome to Underwater Adventures with Alex Mirabal. Today we will talk about how it is to dive and work in highly polluted waters. For that, I will tell you the story of the excavation of the Sanchez Barcáiztegui Spanish warship sunk in the entry of Havana Harbor. So let's dive into it.
Hey everyone! If you want to watch the video in other languages, you simply click on Settings, go to Subtitles, select the subtitles in the original language, then go back to Subtitles, activate the Translate automatically, and scroll down and select your preferred language. In this case, we chose Spanish, obviously. Thank you so much all, and let's get on with the video.
The war cruise ship Alonso Sanchez Barcáiztegui from the Spanish Navy, it has a very interesting story. It has also quite some urban legends going around it because she sunk in 1895 during the Spanish-Cuban War, and it sunk going out of the harbor of Havana. Witnesses said that Barcáiztegui was going out of the harbor with the lights off, totally dark, in the night, in order to intercept consignment of weapons that was sent to the rebel troops, the Cuban rebel troops that were fighting the Spaniards. And then as it went with the lights off, then it collided with the ship that was coming into the harbor. It was the Conde de Mortera, also a Spanish ship. Well, further research into the historical files has proven that the reason was not quite that. The Sanchez Barcáiztegui was going out of the harbor for a normal patrolling task, going up and down the coast and to prevent any kind of illegal activity. But one of the engine men, it has the misfortune of putting his arm in the dynamo belt, severing his arm, but stopping the generator and leaving the ship without light. What happened then? The ship was trying to maneuver to get out of the harbor, and then the Conde de la Mortera was coming in and hit the ship almost midway. So the Barcáiztegui sank in the entry of the harbor, and the Mortera, with a lot of difficulties, managed to get in and save the ship. Funny enough, that was 1895. Funny enough, the Conde de la Mortera in 1905, so only 10 years later, entering the Bay of Nuevitas in the east side of the country, also ran another boat, but in this case was the Mortera who sank, and well, that karma played on him. And we had this Sanchez Barcáiztegui, a great ship from the Spanish Navy, sunk in the middle of the entry of Havana Harbor. The story of the Sanchez Barcáiztegui has been manipulated in many ways. There were sources that says that the Sanchez Barcáiztegui was carrying a safe box with the payment, with the money for the payment of soldiers in the east of Havana, and it was carrying the amount of 6,000 pesos in gold, and that was so established in the popular knowledge that even a North American company in 1905, they sent divers to try to recover that theoretical safe box with these 6,000 pesos in gold, which actually never existed. The American divers, which is very curious, the American divers abort and they stopped the salvage works because at that time the entry of the harbor of Havana was infested with sharks. Sharks became an issue for those divers in those days, and so strong that even with the motivation of trying to get the safe box with so much gold in it, they had to abort and leave the work.
Why were the waters infested with sharks in that specific area?
Well, the entry of the harbor in Havana, it has the Morro Castle on top of it, which is very big fortress. And it has a big dotation of soldiers and a lot of workers there. Also, it was a sort of a prison that it has its cells, and there was plenty of people there. I imagine that they were also throwing away whatever leftovers from the food, or when you have animals that you sacrifice to eat the troops, and everything was being thrown to the sea. So sharks, and plus the harbor of Havana is, the city grew around the harbor. So any discarded material from the city will go into the sea and from the harbor out to the entry. So sharks, I assume they went there in big quantities because they were there to feed. So this was the situation in 1905. But I will be talking about how it is to dive in polluted waters, because when I was working in Cuba and we started the project of excavating the Sanchez Barcáiztegui, already, unfortunately, the harbor of Havana, the Havana Bay, was very, very, very polluted. Nowadays, it's not like that. It's much better. But in that time, we are talking about 1992, 1991, it was almost impossible to dive in that bay. And the Sanchez Barcáiztegui was sitting right in the entry. So if you want to go to the Sanchez Barcáiztegui, you have to dive in those waters. It was as polluted that I can tell you some images, give you some images of how it looks like. Imagine the surface of the sea with such a thick layer of crude oil and wood and garbage in general that rat and mice, they could run over it without being wet.
Ew.
So it was as disgusting as that. I mean, every lixo, what's the saying? The trash from the city and from oil refinery, which was in the bottom of the bay, and everything that at the time they were, remember, in the 90s, there was not such strict rules with the ships. How do they discard the black waters or the oil from the engine? So that was really, but really bad. The Sanchez Barcáiztegui is sunk. It's laying in 18 meters depth, but diving into the Sanchez Barcáiztegui was like a complete nightmare. We had to open a hole in that paste that was on the top of the water, opening a hole with an oar, opening a hole like if you were breaking the ice to go fishing in the ice layers. So they open a hole and keep it open so it doesn't frozen again. We had to do the same for divers to come in. We jump in that little hole that was made, speed up down to the bottom, and in the first depending on the day and depending on the tide, the first 6 or 7 meters you would not be able to see anything. Under that, you would have reasonably clear waters, but then the beauty of that dive, it was that the sunlight was filtered through that layer of things, and it would get down there with a very ghostly illumination, which was actually really beautiful. But you was able, during the dive and the excavation, you were able to smell the rotten water through your gear. How that happens, I don't know, because you have your regulator in your mouth, you have a mask, and you obviously don't allow the mask to take any water in those conditions. But still, the crude oil and the fuel and the oil that you have from all these discards, it really gets into you. It gets a smell when you were diving. The Sanchez Barcáiztegui is a very interesting wreck to excavate, let alone this fantasy safe box with all this gold inside. But it was a warship which was sunk not that long ago, allowing for some of this military material and, for instance, the medical instruments and the medical gadgets or things that the doctor on board had, most of them survived because it's not that long ago. It's only like 150 years or something. It's not that much. And we were able to find very interesting objects in the excavation of the Sanchez Barcáiztegui. In these objects, there was obviously the normal sword handles that has survived, because then the soldiers were using these swords of the Spanish Navy with an eagle in the handle. That was quite common, same as bullets. You have bullets from Mausers. The bullet itself with the case and the casing and the lead on top, not the old musket balls or lead shot, which are just the round piece of lead. These ones with powder inside. Some of them were actually even active after 100 and some years, which is amazing. These are the regular finds, but also we found very interesting stuff like as I mentioned, the vials that the doctor has with his potions. And for instance, there was one with the entire, how would you call that, is Tenia saginata, the name, but it's kind of this parasite that people have inside that is like a long worm. It's like a very long worm, solitary worm or singa.
Tapeworm?
Tapeworm,
Yeah.
a tapeworm. They could grow very long. So there was one of these put in formaldehyde, in formol, one of these tapeworms that the doctor obviously collected from one of the crew or something. Super interesting. A lot of personal belongings, because there were not only soldiers on board, but there's also important people. The captain of the ship, he was found after the accident where many people lost their life in the accident of the Sanchez Barcáiztegui. He was found eaten by shark. He was only recognizable because he was wearing his condecoration in the uniform. You can find all that in internet or check on one of my publications on that wreck. It was really impressive, the disaster of that ship. It brought a lot of human grief to that accident in front of the harbor, in front of the city of Havana. And we were very aware when we were excavating the wreck of the human disaster that accident was. Nevertheless, diving in the Sanchez Barcáiztegui was really challenging for us. First, we couldn't anchor our boat, even if it was 18 meters deep. We couldn't anchor a boat on top of the wreck to go up and down with the divers and the gear, because it's in the entry of the harbor. So the normal traffic in the harbor wouldn't allow, the authorities of the harbor never allowed us to anchor there, because we will be obstaculizing the ships going in and out. So we have to put our ship about 300 meters out of the entry of the harbor and create the path almost in zero visibility, a path of a cable that we put down on the seabed from the anchoring place, that we obviously make a mooring place. We set a fixed point on the seabed that we will tie our boat each time. It's not like throwing the anchor randomly and each day you are in a different place. No, you are always in the same place. And from this mooring point, we had the long steel cable of about 300 meters to the wreck. We will take divers all the way to the wreck and coming back. Along this long cable, we set up bottles, but dive bottles that would eventually, in the case of an accident, it will help the diver to get air on the way back, because we were diving as in a cave. It was not allowed to come up. Even if you have an emergency, it was not allowed to come up from the wreck to the center of the bay, because it was very dangerous for the diver, and to be picked up by the Zodiac or by the auxiliary boat. So we were, in a way, like working inside a cave with one entry point, and from this point you have to go out. These days when we were working, the weeks and the months that we were working in the Sanchez Barcáiztegui, I remember coming back home with my hair smelling like oil, kerosene, my wife trying to take this smell out of me, only for the next day me diving there again twice. We protect ourselves. We wear wetsuits, even if it was not necessary to wear a hood because of the temperature. We wear hoods just to keep the crude oil and all this away from your hair, from your skin. We didn't shave ourselves those days, because any little scratch or cut that you made in your face, you may not even notice it, but it's an entry point in which you have no clue what could go in.
You'll get an infection the size of the Empire State Building.
Exactly, you have no clue what could come into you. I mean, actually, we saw because on top of it, we work in 18 meters and we work for about 1 hour or something. So we had to spend some minutes in the compression, like 3 minutes or 6 minutes in 3 meters. So we have to stay in the middle of that filthy layer to complete your decompression. And in those decompression stops, I have seen in the water column that's going around me such a variety of invertebrates that I have never seen in my life, like jellyfish that I have never seen. Who knows if they were not just mutants of any...
Amoebas that you have never seen.
Amoebas 1 kilo each. I mean, incredible stuff going around you, and you don't want that to get into you. Then, in the moment of going out, remember that it was very difficult to go in. You don't want to jump into that semi-solid layer because it will also stain your wetsuit and your equipment if any of this, because this crude oil that was floating there, it is very sticky. So it can get, for instance, in your mask, happened many times, one of these little clumps hit you in the mask, and then your glass, you cannot even clean it properly under the water because it would leave some greasy part to it, so you have to put some detergent afterwards. But during the dive, you will have your visibility impaired. So it was a problem to go into the water, and it was a problem going out of the water because the people on board, they didn't know when you can come out already. So the only way we found to go out of the water in these conditions was to blow with our regulator. When you were close to the surface, blow a lot of bubbles, but really strong, so you make this kind of opening. Again, it is a very temporary opening in that crust, and then you speed up to that hole, give your colleagues your equipment so they pull it up quickly, and you get out of the water the fastest you can. The Sanchez Barcáiztegui itself, it has a very beautiful story, and the fact that it's in the entry of the harbor, it makes it slightly difficult to dive in comparison to other wrecks. If you add to that the fact that the waters at that time were so much polluted that you have to take all these extra measures. I remember divers getting very weird colds or flu or this kind of uncertain diseases that you said, how do you get this? I mean, we're in the middle of the summer, there is no reason. Well, I'm diving in the Sanchez Barcáiztegui, could have been inhaling a little bit of that water that could, it could kill you. Hopefully none of that happened, but this short video is to explain a little bit how certain conditions can set a different approach to a wreck and why a wreck could become so difficult, even if in theory, because nowadays that the water is not that polluted, it's a nice dive. 18 meters, some currents, nothing that strong. The Sanchez Barcáiztegui is a beautiful wreck. It's a nice view. You will see images of that. It's a nice place, but it has this disadvantage of being in the harbor where really bad conditions of the water, quite dangerous for the divers. So these particular conditions in the harbor of Havana with this high pollution, I mean, it should not be understood as I'm criticizing the management or the work that the government tried to do there. I know, because I'm from the neighborhood, I grew up there, I know how difficult it is to get these waters processed and cleaned, because also Havana and the surrounding factories, it's a very old city and with very old systems of sewage, and the factories were made many years ago, and these factories will just discard the things in the water. Nowadays, all this is over. This has been, a solution has been found for that. And the conditions of the Havana Harbor nowadays, thanks to the effort that many organizations and the government and everyone has done, the conditions are way better, and we expect that somewhere in the future this will be just like perfect. But it will take time. Still, today you can see the progress. You can see the better conditions. I just wanted to mention how an added problem could change or could modulate your dive experience in a place that it happens to be polluted waters all around the world. I have been in many of them, and each time that we go to a new one, that you really have to take care to be aware of the water instead of the depth and the work itself and the currency, but the quality of the water. I remember when I started many years ago this situation with the Sanchez Barcáiztegui. I hope you got this far into the video, and that please, any question that you may have, let me know in the comment section. Give it a like if you found it interesting. Subscribe to the channel. If you want me to also develop some of the questions or some of the subjects that I have touched in this video, please let me know in the comments and I will do. Let's keep in touch and keep on diving.